Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Florida House Book Club as we celebrate the Sunshine State and its outstanding authors. Telling the story of Florida through the written word is a great way to share what makes the state so special. And the book club is a great way for us to live our mission to connect, celebrate, and champion Florida to the world. My name is Hope Hanna, and I am the current president of the Jacksonville Trustees at Florida House. I am standing in for Mary Bebout. She usually is our fearless leader, but she could not be here today. If you are just now being introduced to Florida House, we are the only state embassy in our nation's capital, and it belongs to you, the citizens of Florida, and has no connection to our Florida government. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization supported by incredible trustees in Jacksonville and around the state, several of whom are with us tonight. If you haven't met Sue Mom, Susie O'Quinn, Linda Slade, Jamie Rude, then please say hey. Our Jacksonville chapter trustees are amazing champions for Florida House. Before we get started, I want to thank independent bookstores from around the state who partner with us to bring you this series, and especially Rona Brindley and the Bookmark, who are hosting tonight's questions and answers. Also, there's a great article in Southern Living about the top 20 independent bookstores located in the Southeast, and the Bookmark is featured. It is now my pleasure to introduce one of our trustees from the Jacksonville region, Sue Mom, our past president, to say a few words. Thank you.
Hi. Our author tonight is Les Standiford, and he's one of the best writers today telling stories of Florida through print. He has written over 25 books, including both fiction and nonfiction. His first novel, Spill, was published in 1991, and his works have gone to the top of the charts and have been recognized by some of the most well-respected book communities. Les is also a champion for emerging Florida writers, serving as the founding director of the Creative Writing Program at FIU and the chair of creative writing at Eckerd College. His latest work of nonfiction, Battle to the Big Top, takes readers from the very start of the American circus and traces its legacy through centuries as some of the most well-known figures in entertainment have stepped into the ring. We are excited to be here with Les tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rona and Les. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thank everybody for coming. It's really exciting and an honor for the Bookmark to partner with Florida House, and we're always happy to have Les in the house, so thank you for coming. It's just a treat. One of my favorite authors and one of my favorite people, I have to confess. So tonight, I'm going to ask him a few questions, and then you can have questions, people on Zoom can have questions, and he can just take off on his own. He's pretty good, you know, without too much prompting or help. He's the author, so he knows how to make the words all come together. So welcome again. It's always nice.
Thank you. Great to be here. Always a pleasure to come to the Bookmark. Been coming for 20 years or so now.
Oh, at least, yeah, I know. It's great. So any extra chance I can get, I'm thrilled. So I guess the first question is really, this is about Florida, and why did you pick the circus to be your entry into the state of Florida? As you said, you know, everybody thought the circus was fun, but you didn't realize how much fun it would be to write about.
Well, I knew it was going to be fun to write about. I mean, for heaven's sakes, I'm going to get to write about the elephants and the bearded lady, and how could it not be enjoyable? I didn't realize how important the circus had been to this nation, really. That it reigned for more than a century and a half as the most popular form of entertainment that there was. This was before the circus was all there was by way of mass entertainment. This was before large coliseums or auditoriums that seated very many people, and there were no professional baseball, football, basketball franchises, nothing like that. But circus would move from whistle stop to whistle stop, and some of the bigger cities, 10,000 people would crowd under that tent to watch the circus unfold 3.5 hours, twice a day, two shows, one in the afternoon and one in the evening. And then after everybody went home, they would pack it all up, and it was the effect of moving a city, small town, from one place to the other in 24 hours. And they would, in less than 24 hours, 12 hours, they'd do it all over. They'd start all over again and stitch their way across the country and in that regard. And so circus, to many of the places, these backwater towns where it arrived, this was the biggest thing in the entire year. It became the equivalent of a fourth major national holiday. It was as important as Thanksgiving and Christmas and the 4th of July and the day the circus came to town. Businesses closed, schools closed, the whole town turned out for the most part on the route down from the rail yard down Main Street to wherever the tent was set up to watch the circus parade, and everything changed. I've got a quote in the book from the novelist Hamlin Garland, who wrote about it, trying to conjure up what it meant to a little kid growing up on the prairie who saw nothing, whose entire existence for 364 days of the year was about working and trying to make a living and trying to survive. And then the circus would come with these fabulous animals, with these beautiful women, with these clowns in their costumes, and the animals that no one had ever seen before. The circus was the equivalent of the zoos. There were no zoos at the time. There were menageries owned by wealthy Europeans that people sometimes got invited to, but there wasn't any Columbus Zoo or Miami Zoo. In fact, one of the ironies is that people came to be aware of exotic animals, that they even existed, that they might need some treatment because of the zoo. The zoo brought them there. They would be set up in their cages on the grounds of the circus before the act started in the afternoon. And one of the attractions of the whole day for people was to actually just walk down those rows and look at things like ostriches and emus and giraffes. There hadn't been an elephant on American shores until 1796. Nobody knew about any of these things. So the circus, we have a hard time comprehending how important it was to a time before the internet and magazines and mass media, before television, before radio, before mass entertainment. And it was literally the only show in town in its day.
So you talk about their sense of wonderment in showing up at the circus, and you can hear it in your voice, the sense of wonderment. What was the biggest surprise to you when you started researching the circus and Ringling and Barnum and Bailey and all the big figures?
Well, the biggest surprise, I think, remains how important it really was. What an important industry it was at the time, and what camaraderie grew up among circus people. And there was story after story that I came across about a person marrying into the circus. There was a man named Fred Bradna, for instance, one example, who was a Prussian army officer. And he went with some pals one night to a circus performance in Austria. And it was, as the earlier circuses were, equine centered, a lot of horsemanship, acrobatics, horsemanship, and some static acrobatics, but trick riding was a big central part of it, and how the circus really began. And by this time, equestrians, female riders had entered. It used to be former cavalry officers who'd gotten good riding horses as part of a military troop, and keep body and soul together after they mustered out. They would go about and do trick riding, sort of Tom Mix things, Roy Rogers, old style, early 20s and 30s stuff. We saw a little bit of that in the United States. At any rate, here's Bradna and his army pals, and they're sitting in the front row and they're watching this beautiful equestrian on the back of a horse, and she's galloping around, and suddenly she loses her balance, flies off her horse, lands in the front row in Fred Bradna's lap. He catches her. Well, it was the beginning of a beautiful romance. He ends up, he's so smitten by this woman, and the whole aura, so antithetical to his life as an army officer, he ends up resigning his commission, marrying her, and begins to travel with the circus. But if you're traveling with the circus, it doesn't work like that. You don't get to just hang out. Somebody's going to come to you and say, "Pal, you're going to hang around here. You're going to have to carry your own weight. What can you do?" And so he starts, well, I was in the army, and I'm pretty good at organizing things. And he begins to work as sort of a quartermaster. And then they realize he's got a good voice and he's kind of handsome. And before you know it, he's the ringmaster, and ends up being one of the most well-known of the combined show ringmasters in the teens and 20s and 30s. Fred Bradna was the master ringmaster among circus men. And story after story like that, people became adopted by the circus, and their lives were changed. Even when I was a kid, when it was a kind of a joke, but it wasn't all that much of a joke because people actually did it. Your parents, you'd say to your parents, you didn't like it, you didn't like them, and you didn't like living in this house. Well, fine, run away and join the circus. Really, that was a sort of a rejoinder when I was growing up. And of course, people did run away and join the circus, because if you had grown up in a small town where it looked like life was limited and possibility was limited, and you went to the circus, what you saw, the essence of the circus, and this is what makes it really important, what you saw in the circus were human beings doing what seemed to be impossible things, doing things that simply could not be done. I saw, while I was researching this book, I watched an episode of America's Got Talent, and it featured an acrobat he came out there and then he did a handstand on a table, and then he brought a chair up on the table, and the next thing you know, he's on his hand on the chair, and then there's a little stick, and by the time he's finished, he's about 30 feet up in the air. He's on 6 or 7 different wobbling things. He's upside down and twirling a hula hoop around his left ankle. And Simon Cowell leaps up from his chair, his judge's chair, and he's clapping wildly and says, "I've never seen anything like that." And I turned to my wife and I said, "Obviously, Simon has never been to the circus." So to get back to what I was saying, you imagine you go to the circus, you're from one of these poor little backwater towns, and you see something like this that speaks to you, whether it's acrobatics, aerial acrobatics, lion, people, putting their heads in the mouths of lions, elephants stamp on one end of the teeter-totter, and the acrobat goes flying across the ring and catches on to a bar and then starts doing somersaults. And you say, wow, there is wonder and possibility and glamour in life, and I want to be a part of it. And some people literally, when the circus left town, they went with it. But others, I think, were simply inspired by the fact of this sense of possibility. Again, there was no television. You didn't get to see leading actors and actresses in movies. You didn't get to see that before your very eyes, except at the circus. And this was the conduit for spellbinding young people and giving them the sense that I could do something special. Now, many other forms of entertainment have taken that place, but in its time, this is what the circus did. And that's why for 150 years, the circus reigned as the principal form of entertainment. And the essence of its entertainment was you can, with enough effort, enough talent, and enough hard work and practice, you can do anything. And this message was coming through in terms of the performances of the circus at the time the country was growing, based upon the premise in the US, in the United States, this is a place where you're not bound by a caste system or by royalty. You can come to this country and with enough effort and hard work and persistence and a little bit of luck, you can, the sky's the limit, right?
It's the American way.
And it's why they're still knocking the doors down at the border trying to get in here, because the United States promises that kind of possibility. Mr. Putin, I'm sorry, but they're not knocking down the doors at the gates of Russia. It happens here, only here.
Right.
And the circus was the very emblem of the American dream and American possibility.
And that sense of anything is possible. When you raise the question, I'm going to run away and join the circus. There are songs about that. There are movies, and kids would always threaten that. But you talk about the glamour and wanting to join for that reason. But I think if you read your book and the story of the circus, it also gives a home for people. Somebody like Tom Thumb or the bearded lady who, where are they going to go to have a family? So can you talk about that sort of background, what happens behind the scenes for people who didn't have any place else to be?
Well, it gives me a chance to talk a little bit about the movie they made, The Greatest Showman, the purportedly biography, a sort of a biography of P.T. Barnum. They didn't get a lot factually right in that film. They caught the glamour of the circus, of course, but that's not too hard to do. One thing they did nail, in my mind, was Barnum's feeling for compassion and sense of responsibility for what were called the freaks back then, the human oddities. And Barnum started off in life as an exhibitor, really, of human oddities. The chief among them, most famous, was General Tom Thumb, who stood about 32 inches tall, even when he was an adult, and took Tom Thumb first all around the United States and made a fortune. And then it was such a sensation that all the crowned heads of Europe demanded that Barnum bring Tom Thumb on a tour of Europe, and they did several. And he was asked later on in life, well, Mr. Thumb, do you feel that P.T. Barnum exploited you? And Thumb said, exploited me? Exploited me? If it hadn't been for P.T. Barnum, I'd probably still be locked up in that bedroom where my parents kept me because they were ashamed of what I looked like. P.T. Barnum allowed me to have not only to have a life, but to become famous, to meet every important entertainer, every important politician in the world. I made a fortune. I built a mansion. I built mansions for my family. Exploited in what way? And many of the so-called freaks or oddities said the same thing. For heaven's sakes, it was a chance for me to actually get out and talk to people. And sure, some people made stupid remarks, but you get used to they got a lot of that before I was in the circus. When I was in the circus, at least I'm making a living. I'm important. People are paying good money to come and see me every night. And the camaraderie among themselves was fascinating. It was a chance for them to have a place. They had a place of their own. So the whole idea that somehow the circus exploited these baloney.
That raises another thing that I noticed when I was reading it. You did a very good job of putting things in context. There are things that are hard if you just read them now, at the time would make sense, like calling thing the freaks, which we would not, dare to say now.
Not
but
politically correct today. Nobody would use that term today.
Right. But for this point, you needed to make the point about the elephants and about the freaks and whatever the issues were. There was a different time, and I think it's important for people to understand.
Well, of course, the thing about hindsight, it's always dead on, isn't it? You look back and you can say, I can see what's right and what's wrong from this point of view. And we suffer a lot in this politically correct age from wanting to judge the past by the standards of the present. But what I started to talk about a little bit earlier, if it hadn't been for the circus, a lot of people wouldn't have known, would never have thought to ask, well, where is an elephant most happy, in this life? And there's evidence to show that elephants actually enjoy the performing. They are highly intelligent animals, and they probably also enjoy galloping across the veldt as well. But it's not like almost no evidence exists that in the major shows, in the larger shows, that any animals, and the big cats or the elephants, were mistreated. Now, of course, in some of the rinky-dink places, who knows what a drunk fellow might do. But it was an evolving notion that, oh, wait a minute, no, nobody should be campaigning anymore to put elephants to work in the circus. And in fact is that the Feld family, who bought in the 1960s the combined shows from the Ringling heirs and did their best to keep it going until 2017, when I witnessed the final performance of the Feld-owned combined Barnum and Bailey Ringling shows out in Nassau Coliseum out on Long Island. They're going to bring it back after the 6-year hiatus this summer, but no animals. Right. No animals. Feld came out the night of that final performance, came out with his sons and daughters who were all involved in the circus. As I said, the circus just draws you into it. So all the Feld family had become a part of the circus. There were him, and then there were children, and then there were grandchildren, there were great-grandchildren. It looked like a small high school graduating class out there. They were all out there representing, and he talked about what a labor of love it had been to try to keep the circus going for about 60 years. It was, he said, much like trying to keep the Harlem Globetrotters going. But, they were still fun to go see, but it wasn't like the glory days back in the 50s when there weren't black basketball players. Same way with the circus. He said it had become not quite the only entertainment game in town. So it was difficult to get the audiences. Some days and some weeks were good and some weren't so good, depending on what else might be going on. But he said in 2015, 2 years before this final performance, when we finally decided, yes, we're going to turn the last of the elephants out to pasture. At that point, he said, attendance, which had always been spotty, fell straight off a cliff. And proving the old adage that P.T. Barnum used to quote, his favorite line was, when attempting to entertain the American public, it is best to have an elephant.
Why did these guys find this so important? I mean, they went broke. I mean, they went from the boom of millions of dollars to I have no money. And Bell didn't make money for a very long time, but there was something in their heart that wanted to keep this going.
They fell under the thrall of the circus, which people tend to do. Feld got the idea. He said, the original Feld was a man named Irwin Feld. He was a drugstore owner in Washington, D.C., and ran the first integrated lunch counter in Washington, D.C. And then he began to diversify, and they sold other stuff in drugstores besides toothpaste and drugs. And he started to sell records, and the records sold like crazy. There were records by guys with names like Fats Domino and Chubby Checker and Frankie Avalon and Neil Sedaka. And, you know, Feld didn't know particularly anything about rock and roll, but he saw, you know, kids, and if these guys would come in to meet the, you know, fans and sign records, the place would be jam-packed. And so Feld was an enterprising businessman, and he said, "You guys tour?" "Oh, well, I play down at the club." So he said, no, we're going to do a lot better than that. He said, "What we're going to do is we're going to organize rock and roll tours." So he put 4 or 5 or 6 of these, you know, the Shirelles and, you know, 4 or 5 others, and they'd go around, and there'd be this rock and roll tour. And he got to know every venue of size in the United States, every Coliseum, every auditorium, how to get there, where you could fly into, where you had to take the train, how many seats, on and on and on and on. And in 1956, they erected the Big Top for the last time, the tent, in Pittsburgh. And Feld read about it and saw that the Ringlings heirs said, "From now on, we're only going to appear in permanent coliseums and stadiums." And he calls up the Ringlings and says, "There is nobody in the world who knows more about every possible venue, indoor venue for your circus than me. Why don't you make me your booking agent?" And well, he had a point, and so he became the booking agent for about 10 years. And that's how, then of course, he gets seduced by the circus. And that's when the Ringlings, by the 10 years later, are absolutely sick and tired of it, he said, "Well, I'll buy it." And runs it, because by this time he's come to love the circus. And his son, Kenneth Feld, who's now the one that's going to take the non-animal circus out sometime this summer, says, "Dad, we got to diversify." And Kenneth Feld was the guy who came up, his biggest concept was Disney on Ice. You know, and that was a huge, enormous thing for years, and monster truck jams and other kinds of things, like events, like big events that can be staged in Coliseum.
I can see why they would want to keep it alive. You talked about the elephants, and I'm just mesmerized by the logistics. I mean, you know, you refer to the circus as a city without a zip code, and how in 24 hours they would just pack it all up and move. I mean,
oh yeah, you had a restaurant that you had to move, serving 1,000, 1,500 people. You had a school serving 300 or 400 kids. You had you know, the facilities manager. You had to move a big tent that would hold 8,000 to 10,000 people, so you had to move that. You had to move all the stuff of the circus, including the animals. You're moving a zoo. And you know, a number of people said it was like moving a small town from one town to the next on a pretty much daily basis. But what was the question that
just the logistics of how you even get an elephant here?
First of all, about the elephant, if the circus was the emblem for a perfect emblem for America, the elephant became the essential emblem of the circus, because to stand beside an elephant gives you, makes you feel, well, wait a minute, this thing is so big, it's impossible. It can't be alive. It can't be an independent human creature capable of movement like I am. Come on. And it's smart, and it's massive. You know, it's as tall as this. Seemingly, it would take up, you know, all the space of where you all are sitting there. One elephant, a sizable elephant. So just to be around an elephant makes you think, geez, there are things in this world that I just wasn't really cognizant of until I experienced them. And, you know, you can get that out of going to Niagara Falls too, and looking, you know, being amazed at something impossible. Well, standing beside an elephant gives you the same thing. But one of the best reasons to have an elephant, if you were one of the early, what they called mud shows in the United States, there were about 50 circuses at one time, traveling, crisscrossing each other in the summer season from May to late October, as and this was before railroads were widespread. So they were called mud shows because they traveled on the roads, and there were no such things as paved highways before there were railroads, for sake. So all the roads were mud, all the roads were dirt, and when it rained, they became mud. And the best reason to have an elephant when one of your wagons bogged down was you would come and the elephant didn't pull it, it would put its shoulder and push it out. Come on, push it. So that was your ace, that was your record, your ace in the hole.
I remember not that long ago when the circus came to Jacksonville and they would unload them and the elephants would march downtown and you could see the elephants walking to the circus, It was really
and to watch a parade of them, one after another, it's just like, huh, how can this be? Look how big those living creatures are. And I don't know how many New Yorkers have told me that I used to go and watch them parade through the Holland Tunnel. And it was unbelievable seeing that happen. This thing that's usually clogged with, auto traffic. Here are the elephants.
But so now, you talk about TV being competition and the internet. I mean, it's not a very good kind of experience. And on TV, I always thought, well, that looks like magic, but it could just be TV, I mean, where's the reality now for kids to get that wonderment, not from the internet, which can be fake and made up? This is real stuff.
Well, even movies, you don't know, and watch something impossible happen in the movies. It's probably special effects, But as Kenneth Feld said that night that he came out there, I said, just remember, folks, it's not a magic show, the circus. Anything that you see that's impossible in the circus, it really happened. Right. And that was the essence of the appeal. And some more highfalutin critics, talked about, what we lose as entertainment becomes more digitized and everybody knows it's not real, but it's difficult to remember that it's not real. But one thing is certain. Now that a lot of kids are getting their entertainment not in any kind of group or social setting, but one person sitting there staring into one device, one tablet, or one phone. And there's nobody to turn to and say, do you believe that? Or did that really happen? Or can you believe that? An audience is important to check, the math of things. Can that be? Did you see it? Can you believe that? Is that? Well, you go to the circus and it was a communal thing. Everybody's experiencing the same, and it was reality all at once. And it's different. And some psychologists say, there's something that young people miss with the lack of socialization, audience socialization, where they come to understand how you're supposed to react, what you're supposed to think is really something, what you're supposed to be impressed by, and what's cheesy and tacky, and that's part of what the importance of an audience. And people, when they go, oh, boo, boo, well, there's probably something to that. There's a reason why people are being turned off. And that's an instructive experience, particularly for a young person.
Isn't there a contagion of audience? If one person's excited, you get excited, and it grows.
Well, of course, that too. And then it becomes thrilling.
Yeah.
Thrilling like nothing else, to be a part of an audience, responding as one to accomplish, particularly to great accomplishment. I even think it's sad that nobody goes to movie theaters that see 1,200 and 1,500 people. I used to do that, and I saw The Exorcist in such a theater, and it was just probably, I can still feel the fright, because the fright was magnified by 1,200 times.
Or the Rocky Horror Picture Show, where you actually got the first thing on the screen, right? So, what is the importance of P.T. Barnum? He's such a larger than life figure. What does he define for us?
Barnum was a showman. He was a great showman. He really did it you know, he figured out how to appeal to large audiences. What odd things would people actually pay good money to come to see? And he had a knack for making them want to come to see the Fiji Mermaid, which was the body, I don't know, it was a manatee with a seal's head and a wig, all sewn together. But he made people actually, you know, people would come in and look at it and say, I don't know if that's real or not. And Barnum's response was, did you find it interesting? Oh yeah, I couldn't figure out how you guys sewed that up. I said, well, then you got your money's worth, right? Yeah. So that was his point. It may not have been real, but as long as you felt like it was an entertaining show, you got something out of it. He didn't cheat you.
Yeah.
And he felt that there were a lot of people who were less than honest, that they actually sold people a bill of goods. It was, right. You know, so he took great pride in. Oh, he went around with a woman who he claimed was the former nursemaid of George Washington. Well, you know, she would have been 163 years old at the time. And, you know, maybe she was 80 and had lived, you know, lived a hard life. But a lot of doctors examined her and said, well, I don't know how old she is, but she's, you know, probably maybe 110 or, you know, and until she died, nobody knew. And Barnum said, well, see, I told you so. It was a good show and nobody really, that was the same. Ringling, for instance. First, there was Bailey, who was a sort of traditional circus man in the 1850s and the 1860s, where he was originally had a mud show and he worked his way up. And in fact, his name really wasn't even Bailey. He was one of these kids who ran away from home and joined the circus. He was maltreated. He was orphaned, taken in by his sister who mistreated him, gave him whippings. One day he went out to swim with some of his buddies on the banks of a swift-flowing river not too far from Chicago, and they weren't supposed to be swimming there. And the sheriff or deputy came up to chase him away, and everybody ran. And all the other kids went this way, and he went the other way, and was never seen again. Well, his clothes were still on the bank of the river. The family thought he ran and fell in the river and drowned. He ran away. He said, "This is my chance." He runs, hops on a train, starts working, ends up working as a roustabout for the circus, learns the circus business. Takes the name Bailey of a circus man who took him in. Ends up buying his circus from him when that guy fell into ill health and turns it into something and becomes basically the circus man of his time. And meanwhile, another fellow who was a competitor of Bailey was trying to better him, and he said, "Well, yeah, how can I outdo him? I know. I'm going to go talk P.T. Barnum, who'd retired from show business, and had never been a circus man. He'd only gone around with these, you know, weird single acts for the most part. And then he retired to Connecticut, and he was a state legislator for a couple of terms, and he was kind of casting about in his late 60s. And McIntyre comes and says, "Come on, I want you to. You're a great showman, and you've never been. You can transform the circus industry. Come on." Well, it caught Barnum's attention. So at age 70, he becomes a circus man, and he becomes good. And before you know it, he and Bailey are going head to head. Well, Bailey had an elephant who got pregnant and gave birth to little Columbia, the first elephant ever born in captivity in American shores. Barnum said, "Darn, I got to get this elephant." He sends Bailey a telegram, "I'll buy that little baby elephant for $100,000. Well, in today's money, that would be about $20 million. I'll buy that baby elephant. Bailey said, instead of accepting the offer, he had the photo taken of the telegram, copies of it made and sent in an advertisement to every major newspaper in the United States saying, come to the Bailey Circus and see the baby elephant that P.T. Barnum would pay a king's ransom for. Well, Barnum says, he got me. He's pretty good at this. I got to talk to the guy. They talk, they become partners, and then you had the Barnum and Bailey Circus. And for about 15 years, they had it all to themselves until there was this upstart bunch called the Ringlings, 7 brothers who'd gone to a traveling circus that traveled by riverboat up in Wisconsin. They lived in a town called Baraboo. And they were so fascinated by the circuses in the late 60s, 1860s, that they said, well, come on, let's put on our own circus. And so they got some canvas from their blankets from their mothers and aunts and uncles. They created a tent. They put on charge a penny for neighbors to come in, who actually did for some reason. And John Ringling was the clown. His big act was to be butted by the donkey, or the goat. They had a family goat, and the last act was the goat sees John bending over, and he runs in and hits him in the butt and sends him flying across the little ring that they had. That was the big closer. Anyway, at the end of their season, they made $13.67. They said, we're rich beyond our wildest dream. We're going to, and they stayed in the circus business little by little bit. Before you know it, they get better and they're attracting talent and they're traveling. And by the 1890s, there's serious competition for Barnum and Bailey, to the point that Bailey says, to hell with it, we're going to Europe. Let Ringling have the US market. We'll make more money over there anyway. And that was, Barnum and Bailey never recovered from that. Ringling, from that point on, had the stranglehold on the circus business. And Barnum died in the early 1890s. Bailey died in the just after the turn of the century, and Ringlings bought Barnum and Bailey from the heirs and combined the shows. But for several years, didn't make a big deal out of that. There was Barnum and Bailey circus that traveled, and the Ringling Brothers circus that traveled, even though they were always run by the same people. And after World War I causes sort of major labor shortage, it no longer made sense to try to have 2 operating entities. It was too hard to get workers. So they combined operations, and they still toured 2 shows. And to the very end, even to the last season, they had a red show and a blue show, because it meant you could cover more dates in the relatively short amount of season that you have for the circus. And so there was always an A show and a B show, even through the 30s and the 40s and 50s and the 60s. But to get back to your point, I'm sorry for being, Ringling, John Ringling became the chief procurer of talent for the shows, and he would travel to Europe. And in Europe, unlike Barnum, who traveled all throughout Europe and was absolutely unfazed by any part of it, culturally or educationally, Ringling fell in love with the art and with the culture, with the food, with wine. He became this cultured individual. Well, if you don't believe me, go to the next time you're in Sarasota, visit the compound, see the Ringling Museum over there. It's the finest private collection of Renaissance art in the world. And there's also a circus museum there too. And there's also this fabulous mansion that he built called Cottazon, House of John, which is in its slightly smaller way the equal to Henry Flagler's Whitehall down in Palm Beach. Ringling became to Sarasota what Flagler was to Palm Beach. Before Ringling came down there, built his house, moved the winter headquarters of the circus. Sarasota was just a real fly speck, and he really essentially is responsible for creating modern day Sarasota.
Well, I think that you raised the point I was going to raise about the importance of, so the book also talks about the entrepreneurship of these people. It was amazing, you know, again, the American way, but I want to bring it back to the Florida house here and ask you why Florida and why was this such a good entry into the history of Florida for you? And then we can open it up to other people who might have questions.
Sure.
I could hog you all night, but that's
Well, Ringling brought the circus to Florida, another cost-cutting measure. Barnum had placed his winter headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, in the area of Stamford, Connecticut. And when the shows were combined, Ringling just stuck with it. He moved the Ringling winter headquarters from Baraboo to Stamford, which there are people up in Baraboo, Wisconsin that, you know, it just can't talk about it. See, it was such a betrayal of John Ringling to do this. I mean, we're talking, I mean, almost 100-year history of really ill feeling. Still,
to hold the grudge.
yeah, oh yeah. This is sometimes it's amazing to find out what is still living history for people and circus history and Ringling history in Baraboo, Wisconsin. I'm here to tell you, it's living history. Anyway, he moves the winter headquarters to Stamford. And then as they were thinking about combining the workforce after World War I, when it was hard to find, or during World War I, when all the young men were off fighting, it also occurred to him, wait a minute, we're spending good money to keep these animals housed in barns. It's such a cash drain, I can't believe it. He'd been to Sarasota by this time and realized we can let them roam the pastures and, you know, be outdoors and be in pens where people can see. We'll charge admission, and what was a drain, and we'll charge people to come in and see the axe training, you know, in the outdoor grounds in Sarasota. So what had been a financial drain for Ringling became, you know, great success, and then it also helped put Sarasota on the map. Yeah. So the circus, you know, I didn't put this book, finish it up in Florida. The last third of it or so is about Ringling and what happens in Florida. But you know, I live in Florida and come to be attuned to larger than life people doing larger than life things. And you know, come to find out there's been a lot of that in Florida. And I just happen to be, you know, in some cases kind of fallen into my lap, luckily, happily.
Well, lucky for us too, because then you shared them with us and we get to have all these wonderful experiences through you. So thank you for that. We appreciate it. I'm going to open it up. If anybody has questions, are there any questions on Zoom that people are asking? Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, I certainly look forward to reading this book. I enjoyed all your other, not all your others, but about 4 or 5 of them that I've read.
You know, we can be friends.
Yes. So you had mentioned that Tom Thumb became wealthy. Were in fact the people who worked in the circus well paid? I thought they really just got their room and board. And
well, some you know, some were common laborers. They made $1 a day. You know, $1.50 would be an average. To the 1920s, $1.50 a day for a laborer would be big money. But the capable entertainers would make a lot more than would make much more than that. Tom Thumb, oh, you know, I've got the figures in the book. They sometimes, you know, eludes me, but for him to make $5,000 a week, I think would not have been uncommon.
wow.
And in those days, multiply that by 200.
Yes.
To get, you know, so what is that?
It's
lot.
a million.
$1 million.
Anybody else? Yeah. You have a Zoom question.
So we have a question from one of our Florida House trustees, Susan from the Tampa area. And what she wants to know is that fire never really seemed to discourage P.T. Barnum. Why do you think he was so resilient? He was knocked down so much with Jumbo, with all the fires at the museum. What made him so resilient?
he lost, I think, 3 venues to fire. And fire was always the bane of the circus because there were flammable materials, the straw, the primitive fireproofing was paraffin that they'd smear on canvas. And lighting was not electrical lighting; it was kerosene, light or torches, and then kerosene lighting. So that this was a major hazard for the industry. As to why Barnum was not deterred, I tell my students sometimes there's a formula for success. 25% talent, 25% hard work, 25% persistence, and 25% luck, success. And you have to have a goal to be moving toward for any of that to matter. But what distinguishes so many successful people is their drive. Sure, they have talent. Barnum had a certain talent, particularly for a gift of gab and being a garrulous, enjoyable person to be around. But that didn't make him successful. His desire to become successful and his persistence, and of course, a certain amount of luck. But as a lot of people, successful people I've met have told me, the harder I work, the luckier I seem to get. And what Barnum had was just in his nature that perseverance, that being knocked down to him just meant the necessity to pick yourself back up, or nobody was going to take care of him. Well, was no such thing as Social Security. He had, by this time, large families and other people depending on him, and he just saw that as a mission. Now, why one person has that and another one just doesn't, I don't know. But he had it, as the Ringlings did. I've often said, vision. A lot of successful people are said to be visionary, and I agree that they are visionary. But you know what? Vision has nothing whatsoever to do with some uncanny ability to see what's going to happen in the future, read tea leaves and know that oil is going to go up to X dollars a ton, or a gallon. That's not what vision is. Vision is, in this context, it refers to the capability of an individual to perceive, to see himself at a certain station in life, at a certain point in the future, to envision yourself there at that station, having accomplished this. And then once you've envisioned it, you can set about getting there, overcoming the obstacles that you, of course, know are going to stand in the way between where you are, point where you develop that vision, and achieving it. That's what vision is. And Barnum had it, and the Ringlings had it. A number of the showmen had it, and most successful people have it. But it's not reading, foretelling the future. It's seeing yourself where you want to be, and then deciding upon the plan to get yourself there.
Do we have time for one more question if somebody has one? Or
John there.
Hey, Les, one of my favorites is Last Train to Paradise, and we're sitting here in North Florida. You talk about larger than life personalities with Ringling, what they accomplished. I just wonder, as you did the research, have you, on both men, have you, Flagler and Ringling, were there similarities? Not that they were driven, because of course they had to be, but were there similarities in their passion and what they did and how they did it and why they came together and were so important, not only to Florida, but to the country at that time?
Well, that's a very good question. They were two very different types of individual. Flagler was sort of taciturn, kept to himself, didn't like to talk much, kept his feelings to himself. Whereas John Ringling became one of the most popular figures, public figures in America. Everyone loved to visit John Ringling at Cottazon. Celebrities, sports figures, they flocked to Cottazon to hang out with Ringling. But what they had in common was this vision. And in both their cases, they saw Florida as the land of dreams. Henry Flagler hadn't been anywhere. He never went to Europe all his life, but he came to Florida. He saw beaches, he saw palm trees, he saw breakers on the sand, blue skies. You know, he grew up in, for God's sakes, by Cleveland. And he said, holy cow, nobody even comes here. No wonder, because the hotels are lousy. I'm going to build one. And he built, you know, what became the old main Flagler College, now the grandest hotel in all the world, and then a railroad for people to come to it. And then repeated that formula, build a hotel, extend the railroad all the way to Key West. Principally because he wanted people to have the same pleasure, have the same fun that he had. And to tell you the truth, that's what brought Ringling to Sarasota. He came down there and looked and said, for heaven's sakes, Stamford, Connecticut, Sarasota, Florida, pay money to keep these animals warm and allow people to enjoy, have fun watching them cavort. It wasn't a hard decision. And once he settled it, once he made that move, he made the most of it. He had tremendous ambitions for development in and around Sarasota, most of which foundered during the Florida bust of the 20s. And Flagler was gone by then. He had died. He was gone 20 years before that happened. It was a generation prior to Ringling. But they shared that vision, and they saw Florida as the perfect canvas for the vision, different as they were personally.
I think that's the perfect place to end, because if I like the state of Florida, and that's what we're really here about today, is Florida House and the Florida House Book Club. And thank you all, and thank you for partnering with us, Florida House, and thank you, Les, for once again introducing to the wonderment of history and the circuits and everything that goes with it.
Thank you. Good night.